Well, I'm August Cole, the director of the Art of Future Warfare project at the Atlantic Council. And we're lucky to be joined today by Matt Gallagher, the author of the upcoming book, Youngblood. He's a former Army captain and an established writer whose work has appeared everywhere from the New York Times to the Boston Globe, most recently this weekend. He's involved in Words After War, a veterans writing organization in New York that is doing some great work and has been a good friend of the project. So Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, August. Looking forward to this.
Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation about the role that writing plays in your experience as a veteran, but also when you were serving in Iraq too as a writer. Talk a bit about why you chose to turn to writing as a way to essentially tell a story of your experiences as a soldier.
Sure, yeah, no, writing's just always been a way for me to make sense of the world. It's just something my mom encouraged my brother and I to do growing up, to read, to write, to kind of see the big bad world out there, right? So when I was over there in 2007 and 2008 as a Scout platoon leader with the 25th Infantry Division, I started blogging. And I didn't really know it at the time. At the time, I was just kind of doing it to keep in touch with family and friends. But looking back on it, of course, it was a way for me to kind of try to make sense of our day-to-day lives, try to piece together the puzzle that was kind of day-to-day counterinsurgency at the time. And it was a jigsaw puzzle that didn't have all the pieces, but it was still the act of trying to put it together first in my mind, and then through the writing process made me better understand what we were doing and what we were trying to accomplish.
What was it like that moment when you decided, you know what, I'm going to blog about what I'm experiencing right now? And talk a little bit about like that kind of threshold that you crossed and how you decided to do that, because I think that's something a lot of people who are in service now wrestle with too. What is the role that writing has in my professional experience, but also my professional obligations to sort of tell my story?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a different time. It was 2007. Military blogs were pretty vibrant, but I mostly just started it to keep in touch with family and friends. I didn't really kind of look at it as a professional benefit or detraction. The war was the Iraq War was so political then, and it still very much is. I just figured it'd be a way to for family and friends who were interested in what we were doing, it would be something they could come visit. And if they weren't interested, then they wouldn't have to. I didn't want to do kind of the Baghdad version of the study abroad email that we all get blasted with. It's the first time somebody visits London or something, and they spam 6,000 of their nearest and dearest. I didn't want to do that. So very naively at the time, I thought it would just kind of be a small thing that people outside of my small circle of family and friends wouldn't be interested in. But that's not how the internet works.
And that became a book. I mean, you, I think, showed that there was real value in some of the observations you had about the complexities of operating in Iraq and your understanding of what your service was like there.
Yeah, it was really fortuitous. It just kind of came together. I mean, I still remember the time somebody left a comment that wasn't my mom. That was fun, and I knew she wasn't pretending to be somebody else either. So that was cool, and yeah, it just kind of came together and became a nonfiction book. I kind of grown up wanting to be a writer, but I was just kind of a skinny Irish kid from Reno, Nevada. I didn't know how somebody became a writer. So something maybe I wanted to do someday. Maybe when I was kind of an old man with gray hair or something. But the blog came together. It getting shut down by my chain of command when I was over there probably helped speed along that process, or at least generated some interest from the publishing houses. So when I decided that I was going to get out after my 4 years and separate from the Army, it seemed like something I wanted to pursue, and then it led to Kaboom, the book, which was published in 2010, and then like it or ready or not, I was a writer, and I didn't have a gray hair yet. I have a couple now, but at the time I didn't.
Publishing will do that to you. But you said something interesting about the pushback officially, and that may have helped. Or tell me how you think that kind of changed the credibility you had with your peers, but also the public.
Oh, that's a good question. It kind of became this brouhaha, like there were congressional inquiries into it. I mean, it really wasn't much to it. I made fun of my battalion commander on the internet, and we can't make fun of our bosses on the internet, whatever our vocation is, but certainly in the military. he was well within his right to shut the blog down. I handled it poorly. He handled it poorly. It was, just one of those things, but it was also kind of a silly thing in the midst of 2008 Iraq. He still promoted me to captain. Maybe he put the bars on me a little harder than necessary, but that's all right. But in terms of the public perception, I think it kind of drew attention to this in a way that otherwise maybe would not have happened. Some people, it was kind of, it became a cipher. If people wanted to see it as the man shutting down this young voice from the front, they could see that. If they wanted to see, this is what our troops are really experiencing, I want to know more about this, they could. So it kind of became this box that people could put whatever they wanted into it, which was kind of strange, frankly, because it was just very surreal compared to I was still over there. I was still going on patrols 3-4 times a day. But it was nice. It meant people cared. People were reading, and how can that be a bad thing? That I wanted to be aware of that as I transitioned to being a writer. That this is a platform, and it's a good one, and it needs to be utilized as a way to be inclusive and helpful, rather than maybe divisive and soapboxy, which can often happen in kind of the military writing sphere.
Well, you helped put Reno on the map for more good reasons too. The transition that you made to fiction is really interesting, because with Youngblood, which comes out this week, you have a book that is incredibly introspective from like my reading of it, but also it's just got great structure as a story, and I think a lot of writers and struggle with that. So I'd love to hear about this transition that you made to fiction and why you decided to do that, and particularly to do it in a story that clearly must be in some way autobiographical.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I kind of wanted to be a writer, but in that the dream was always to write fiction. Those were the writers that had really resonated with me growing up. Hemingway, of course, like a lot of young men. Let's see. Fitzgerald, Stephen Crane, on and on. Richard Ford, Tim O'Brien. Those were the kind of books that I was drawn to as I was growing up. So then I found myself as a nonfiction writer, and I basically decided that I was trying my hand at fiction and realized that I needed to get better at it. So I decided to go back to grad school for it and pursue an MFA, the most practical of degrees out there. An MFA in creative writing isn't for everybody, but it helped me write this book. It taught me to treat the craft with the utmost seriousness, to the structure that you mentioned. That was all learned in the classroom. I studied under Pulitzer Prize winners, magazine editors, studied with people that I was probably the first veteran they'd ever encountered, and we were sharing our writing with one another. That was immensely helpful. Because I wanted to write a book that was inclusive, like I mentioned earlier, that could bring people to a world that maybe they thought they couldn't understand before.
I'm going to read one of the blurbs for the book by Tim O'Brien. He says, "Youngblood is not only a war novel, it is a rich, fully formed, and beautifully executed novel. Way beyond the chicken coops of genre, a novel about the human heart in contest with itself, a novel about memory and longing and grief and hope and guilt, and late-night ironies that raise a chuckle to the lips of the dead." How did it feel when you got that blurb? It's pretty good.
It was amazing. It was amazing. We sent him a early copy of the book over the summer, just kind of on a lark. I mean, what writer of war wouldn't love to get an endorsement from Tim O'Brien? Didn't think he's a very busy guy, so we didn't think we'd hear anything, but it was worth a shot. Maybe 3 weeks later, got the nicest, most gracious, generous note from him that included that blurb. And I'll admit, I was in my apartment when I got the email, and I think I put on "Power" by Kanye West, and I danced with my dog. But yeah, it was amazing, and still is. So I'm just so appreciative, because he's been a longtime literary hero of mine, and him endorsing the book so early like that really brought it to the attention of some other people that might not have otherwise heard of it.
One of the things that the structure of the book, I think, is really helpful for, it gives you a way to explore the gray areas in this story, whether it's Lieutenant Jack Porter, who's sort of your protagonist, and I don't want to spoil any of the book here, but really trying to understand, the ins and outs of the day-to-day ambiguity. You have really, I think, done a nice job of clearly walking characters through positions that seem like they're morally clear at the outset, and then obviously are far more complex. Who is Jack Porter as lieutenant, and how much of his questioning experience is related to yours?
Yeah, no, I mean, he does share some autobiographical details, young lieutenant from the West Coast. But I'd already written the book from the perspective of Matt Gallagher, and even early on in early drafts of Youngblood, I knew that the narrator, I wanted to write first person, because I think first person allows for kind of this deeper emotional texture and resonance that I wanted this novel to have. But he needed to be more interesting than me, kind of more conflicted, more engaging. For better or for worse, I've been able to compartmentalize my time in the Army and my time in Iraq. I don't think I'm spoiling anything to say that Jack is not going to have that fate. It started with just kind of early tricks. I'm an older brother. And have been accused of being a hothead every now and then. Jack is a younger brother and much more like my little brother, and he's very cool, much more slow to burn. But when he does, emotionally connect with something, it sticks. Then it started with he's there a few years after I was there. There's kind of a bi-level narrative going on in terms of he's there near the end of the Iraq occupation and investigating something that may or may not have occurred in this Iraqi town in 2006 during the sectarian wars. The author was over there in 2007 and 2008, so I was able to kind of serve as a conduit between these two stories. But as a result, I had to do a lot of research about both of. I couldn't just rely on my own experiences, because I'd been there in a different time. So I read a ton of journalism. I read a ton of great nonfiction books. I read a ton of oral histories, particularly oral histories about the Iraqi people, because it was very important to me that this novel have a variety of vibrant, full, dimensional Iraqi characters, not just because they were such an important part of my experience, though they were, but because they've endured this entire thing. Don't be wrong, 15 months was a long tour. That's nothing compared to the decade-long plus war and occupation and ruin that the everyday Iraqi people have had to endure since 2003.
One of the really interesting things about your character, Jack Porter, is that to find his moral compass in terms of what rules he should follow, what traditions he should break. He almost had to, I think, see within Sergeant Chambers who he didn't want to be. And in that sense of that peer group when you're deployed, the officer to the enlisted, that back and forth between them is really, really fraught and tense in the book. Talk a bit about how you use that to explore some of the practical realities of how we respond emotionally, but also professionally, or when you are a soldier.
Sure. Yeah, I think the central seed for that dynamic was looking at my own service and realizing everything had gone right. I had the best sergeants, the best NCOs. We turned right when we needed to instead of turning left. In many ways, just led a very blessed tour. Over the course of my research, that was rare. Encountering a lot of stories of soldiers and officers and enlisted on both sides, kind of being compressed in these environments where everything went wrong, and that interested me. So taking these kind of two very different, not just worldviews, but views towards war. Views towards what the Iraq occupation has meant, views toward what they should be doing at that time near the withdrawal, and putting them in these two men. One Chambers, a battle-hardened veteran of 4 tours, who's very Machiavellian in many ways. But you know what? I have a lot of respect for him as I wrote him as a character, because he gets things done. The world needs more Chambers than they do Jack Porters. On the other hand, Jack is there to kind of serve as a moral compass. Even though he's trying to figure out himself, that is part of his role as the platoon leader, especially when confronted with a platoon sergeant who's very charismatic, but clearly has such sway over those around him, both American and Iraqi. So kind of putting these two in conflict, even though I think they end up growing to have a strange sort of respect for one another, but not just pitting the men against one another, but putting their philosophies against one another in this kind of sectarian, dynamic, ever-changing world. It just felt like the perfect place for a novel. Frankly, I could take it a lot of places, and that's what we did.
The compass that Sergeant Chambers, your character, has is clearly pointed in a different direction than Lieutenant Porter, but it's pointed in a pretty convincing way. I mean, his reading list, the books that he throws literally at Lieutenant Porter. He's talking about St. Augustine. And this is someone who's done some thinking about his role in this really complicated and fraught environment. You said that people like Chambers to have more of them. Tell me what you mean by that, relative to somebody like Jack Porter in the context of this sort of enduring campaign we're facing in the Mideast, Iraq today, being different even than it was 3 years ago, but Syria potentially.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think one of my friends who read a draft of this novel asked me, what we're seeing what Chambers is like on tour 4. What was Chambers like on tour 1? Was he a believer the way Jack wants to be? And I think so. So for me, kind of establishing this character to kind of be the inevitable consequence of decade-long plus deployments that will wear and tear on even the hardiest of souls, to the point where his entire purpose is to only bring his men home. That is the goal and reason to be for Staff Sergeant Chambers. And on one level, what more could we want from an NCO, from a staff sergeant, especially on the ground level? If I was one of those privates' parents, I could not want anything more from that staff sergeant. On the other hand, on a macro level, that's going to come with some compromises, and it's going to come and it's going to come at the cost of other people. Oftentimes, maybe the Iraqi people who are living amongst these American soldiers who are interacting with Sergeant Chambers every day. So when I say that the world needs more Sergeant Chambers, it's because we have to function, right? Only the internet commentariat can kind of live in absolutes. We all make compromises just to keep the world going, to keep our organizations going, to keep in marriage. Anyone who's married knows you got to make compromises to just to keep the peace. Jack is struggling with that, and a lot of that is because Jack hasn't endured or hasn't had to endure what Sergeant Chambers has seen. But that also doesn't make Jack wrong. Kind of the pragmatic and Machiavellian worldview of Chambers versus kind of the idealistic nobility that Jack wants to pursue. Those things, one of those things is going to have to break when confronted with one another. But in terms of why the world needs more Sergeant Chambers, it's because it's a complicated place, and if everybody was picking a hill to die on, like Jack could potentially do it at points in the narrative, nothing would ever get done.
Is the role that somebody like Chambers has in setting, or his peers around him, their direction, something that as we see longer and longer engagement in the region, that this moral compass is very much an individual, like small unit question. The counterinsurgency narrative is sort of a rising tide lift all boats, sort of positive, sure. Sum game. But after reading your book, I got really a kind of zero sum game sense that for one side to win, another has to lose.
At least that was the case with how the Iraq War from 2003 to 2011 played out, at least from this perspective. And who lost? The Iraqi people lost, really. It's a interest. I enjoy the academic debates about coin, and I find it super interesting, and not just because I was there as part of it, but I look back, and when we left in early 2009, we thought we'd won the war. I mean, it seems so quaint now, but we thought we had turned that tide. that didn't hold, and who lost as a result? Yeah, the American service members who didn't come back, or maybe feel that the cause they had joined up to pursue and devoted so much to has been swept away. Yeah, they did lose, but not in the way that the everyday Iraqi citizens have, and that was so important to me. It was part of the reason I started writing this book. I was halfway through a novel about New York that had very little to do with the military, or very little to do with kind of the military-civilian divide, when we were withdrawing in 2011, and that was kind of the impetus for this. Was what now? What does this look like? And over the course of writing this novel, I got the answer to that question.
Where does our moral compass, do you think, come from? As Americans, I see this from a civilian perspective. The sources are, myriad these days. Mm-hmm. With your experience and in reading this book, it looks like, there's obviously a professional military education, professionalism that go with that, no matter where you are in the organization. But I keep thinking about the long, drawn-out campaign that we've been engaged in that part of the world, and that maintaining that during the practical realities of a withdrawal or sustaining, making sure we don't go back. It seems incredibly difficult to hold that intention with the chambers-like realities of operating. And I have to imagine that's as true for the irregular kind of special operations missions that are being conducted today. Something you wrote about this weekend, actually. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to kind of hear you kind of weigh in on that spectrum of the way we use force, but also still coming back to these very basic questions of, and often subjective of I guess, right and wrong outcomes, ends and means.
Sure. Yeah. For me, a big concern with how we're conducting war now, and it's, I think, reflected in both Youngblood and certainly my op-ed in the Times yesterday, is what is the purpose? What do we have an end state here, or are we just kicking a can down the road? If we're not fighting for some kind of end, some kind of peace over there, some kind of resolution, it allows this kind of perpetual, endless war thing to actually become that, right? Dexter Filkins was titled his book "The Forever War" in 2004, and perhaps in my own naivety, I thought he was being ironic. No, he wasn't, and he got that from a science fiction novel about this, kind of related to Vietnam from the 70s. It's something I wrestle with. I don't have a clear, concise answer. If I did, I probably wouldn't be a creative writer. I'd probably be making 7 figures as a DC consultant or something. But it's something that I wish more American citizens were thinking about and considering and confronting. Not just because they're taxpayers and this is where the money's going, but because those operators conducting raids right now in Syria and northern Iraq, they're wearing the flag of America on their shoulders, right? They're representing us all. We need, it's part of being a republic for us to be engaged with the military, and to have the military engage with us. I understand the security reasons and everything, but the anecdote in the op-ed yesterday speaks to that kind of endlessness, right? The operators got their guys, right? And they probably were Al-Qaeda in Iraq, right? Our operators are the best they are at what they do. They had their reasons to go get those men. That said, does that matter to that 9-year-old boy in the soccer jersey, who all he knows is, he goes to bed one night with his dad and his uncle, everything's fine, and his pet dog, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and his dad and his uncle have been taken and the dog has been shot, right? It doesn't matter that they trot out the cavalry lieutenant the next day with a baby face to apologize and to try to provide condolence funds. All he knows is the Americans did this, right? And I think back to that kid a lot. I don't know what happened to him, but this small hamlet where he lived was right on that sectarian fault line that separates the Islamic State right now from the Republic of Iraq. He was Sunni. He'd certainly be old. He's been old enough to carry a rifle for years now. I don't know if he's joined ISIS. I don't know if or maybe he's just a date farmer. if he did, he'd have his reasons. He'd have his reasons, and that's just one anecdote, but I think it speaks to kind of the cycle of that perpetual warfare can induce if we're not working towards a clear end state.
Yeah, I feel like that anecdote that you related in the op-ed is very much thematically woven throughout Youngblood, and that, in many ways what you're talking about is a lack of strategy, and its importance that we consider, the cost of that. And, certainly a book like yours, which is fiction, can be really, really useful for that. I mean, I think, the Joel Haldeman book you mentioned, Forever War, is one of science fiction's,
right?
Yeah, it's one of science fiction's best, I think, kind of cases that this kind of creative thinking can make us really consider the long game, and why we fight, why we ask our nation to do these sorts of things. As a closing question, I'd love to know what you're working on next, and what you're reading right now, and if there's anything that you want to flag to people's attention that they should be watching or reading or playing in the context of what we've been talking about.
Sure. What I'm writing now, I'm putting finishing touches on a short story. It's written from a female veteran's perspective, and it's about a kickball league in Brooklyn. So it's fun. It's kind of ridiculous, but I really like her as a narrator. It's somebody I'd want to spend time with.
Is that a first person?
It is. So it comes with all kinds of risks. She's a Marine too, which is some of my Marine friends are a bit wary of an Army dude writing from a Marine's perspective, but it's been fun. It's important, I think, for writers to try new things and to get out of their own heads. Whatever the narrative mode or whatever the style is. So that should be running in a magazine in the next couple months. Playboy will be publishing, so I'm polishing that up for them. What I'm reading right now, honestly, between Youngblood and that short story, I'm just really sick of war stories and veteran type stuff. So I'm reading a great short story collection that's coming out this month called Dog Run Moon. It's by a young author named Callan Wink. He's published stuff in the New Yorker, and it's kind of like Western stories, kind of the tradition of Thomas McGuane or Richard Ford, and it's just fantastic. And being a Nevada kid myself, it really makes me kind of miss the majesty of the Western skies and mountains, especially. I think I've been in Brooklyn too long. You don't get much of that out here. Let's see. And as for anyone watching, just thank you for taking the time. And Youngblood's out tomorrow. It's available for order, and I'll be going on tour on Eastern Seaboard and then out west. And you can find me. You can find the event list of events at mattgallagherauthor.com, and I'm also at Twitter at mattgallagher0. And I'm a terrible procrastinator, so I'm on Twitter a fair amount. So you can probably get in touch with me there pretty quickly.
Great. Matt, thanks for the time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, August. Good talking with you.
I'm August Cole with the Atlantic Council's Art of Future Warfare project. We've been joined today by Matt Gallagher, author of Youngblood, which comes out tomorrow, and we'll be looking for more of his short stories in the coming months. Matt, thanks again.
Thanks, August. Have a good one.
You too.